widely held belief about West Ham's imminent takeover is this: that when we get to April 2023 and the embarrassment clause ends, Gold & Sullivan will sell up to Daniel Kretinsky. Now, as regular watchers of this channel will know, I don't really subscribe to this. I'm a little bit sceptical as to whether that will happen. What's the embarrassment clause? Well, when West Ham were handed the keys to the Olympic Stadium, certainly the mayor's office at the time were a little bit worried that we may use the elevated status of the Olympic Stadium to increase the value of West Ham, and we may be able to basically flip, which would be the term that I'd probably use, or Gold & Sullivan would be able to flip the club at a massive profit. The embarrassment clause was that if Gold & Sullivan did sell that off the back of an elevated status because West Ham were in an iconic large stadium, then the taxpayer would get a share of the profits. This would run until April 2023, which you don't need a calendar in front of you to know that that's approaching pretty fast. So, what we also get, and you'll have to excuse me if I wipe my brow every so often, because we're going to get into the murky waters of who West Ham's board of directors are and what I perceive to be one of the candidates for a full takeover of West Ham United. Now, when I say one of the candidates, you have to sort of go along with my cynical way of looking at it, or at least sceptical, let's put it that way, my sceptical way of looking at it, which is I don't believe that Daniel Kretinsky will buy all the shares of West Ham United. Where are we with Kretinsky? Well, Kretinsky bought some shares. What happened was he bought a set number of shares, which a share issue was raised. Kretinsky bought a load of them, and he has a buyout clause for the rest. Now, that buyout clause is only activated at a certain price and a set price for anybody that wants to sell those shares. So if you're David Gold and you want to sell your shares, you have to offer them to Kretinsky first of all. That's how it is. That's how the deal has been constructed, and you have to give them to Kretinsky at the set price. So because of that, I think a lot of people have put two and two together, which may well make four in this instance, but I'm not so sure myself, and let me share the rest with you. There's another complication. That complication came around, I think it was in 2017, when Albert Tripp Smith bought 10% of the club. Now, Albert Tripp Smith he's a rich man in his own right, but he is closely associated with Chase Manhattan Bank, or as it is now, Chase JP Morgan. Now, that's quite significant, but also the other thing to remember about Tripp Smith is Tripp Smith has brokered an awful lot of buyouts, hedge funds, buyouts for companies. He's been involved in US sport before. That's what he does. He's a broker to facilitate those kind of deals. So you would probably think that when Daniel Kretinsky came into West Ham, that Tripp Smith would leave. No, he's held on to his shares. And you can actually see now he's one of the shareholders. Now, this is where it gets interesting and a little bit confusing. But here's the point I want to make before I go back into the detail, because I feel there's a little bit of a smoking gun here. I'm going to give you a name now, who you may well have heard. His name's Jim Ratcliffe, or should I say Sir James Arthur Ratcliffe. He's minted. He's a really, really rich bloke. He's English. He's from London. He's basically got rich in the chemicals industry. He's worth about 13 billion at the moment. He's a joint third owner in a company with a turnover of $65 billion a year. Well, that much in 2021 at least. Very, very rich man. Now, for a long time, Jim Ratcliffe was interested by Manchester United. But I only bring this to your attention now because I've been hearing whispers for a little while that Jim Ratcliffe might well have been interested in buying West Ham United. And this sort of feeds into what I suspect might have been happening. So what I think is, my take on everything is that Daniel Kretinsky has bought West Ham shares not so as he can one day own the club, but as an investment. So as when West Ham is eventually sold, he can make some money, basically. I think Kretinsky's in it for the money rather than the love of West Ham. I mean, call me an old cynic if you will. I think the reason that Albert Tripp Smith has remained at West Ham is so he can facilitate this deal. Now, Jim Ratcliffe, I think, was one of 2 or 3 people who might have been interested in buying the club. This was the plan all along. This is why Pi Capital never stood a chance, or at least in my opinion. It was never going to happen. The whole idea was to basically flip the club, albeit however long they've been custodians of the club, Gold and Sullivan, call it a 10, 12-year flip, but to do it for big money, to really elevate the status of West Ham and to elevate the amount of money that they could charge for West Ham. And the money that Chelsea went for has really sort of blown that up. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So Chelsea, it depends which paper you read, but Chelsea went for around 3 billion, as I understand it. And that's really set the benchmark for a lot of clubs. And here's where it becomes important, because the Glazers have recently put Manchester United up for sale, and they want 5 billion. They might get it, they might not get it, I don't know. But that's their price. And you would have to say, putting all football rivalries aside, that Manchester United are a bigger club than Chelsea. They've won more, at least in their history. They've got more fans globally, bigger stadium, so on and so forth. Chelsea undoubtedly have closed the gap over the last 20 years. You have to say that. But if Chelsea are 3 billion, can Man United be worth 5 billion? It's rude and ridiculous money. I guess they can. And I think the point is here that there's a lot of financiers, a lot of backers, a lot of investors who are now looking at football as a means to actually make money. I mean, and you really can. Let's be fair, if you can do what the Glazers have done and buy Manchester United for £600 million worth of borrowed money and then sell it on for 5 billion, you've done rather well, haven't you? If you can do what Gold and Sullivan hoped to do, and that is buy the club for, I think it might have been 50 million was their initial outlay, get all your loans paid back, everything you've loaned the club, and then walk away with 300-400 million, you've done all right. You can actually see, what you're looking at is more or less 90. You're increasing it by 90%, aren't you? You're almost, you're timesing it by almost 10, is what I'm saying, on the sale of these clubs. Now, here's the important thing. Recently, we've had a change of directorship. We've had this little switcheroo on the board of directors at West Ham. Is anybody still watching this? You've probably gone to sleep, haven't you? But I wanted to do the video because there'll be something to follow this up in a few months, and I sort of wanted this to be here as not as a benchmark, but as a marker, if you want. So the little boardroom reshuffle was glossed over. And here's the thing: on the West Ham website, there's a section which is called Who's Who. Who's Who West Ham United FC. And it's basically it's a who's who of who's in the board, who's the playing staff, who's the coaching staff. But on the board, when it's listed, Daniel Kretinsky's not on there. Now, I'm pretty sure the board would say, we just haven't updated it. But you have to go to Companies House, and the Companies House, which is where you have to legally register everything properly, reads quite differently. Because not only do you have Tripp Smith on there, not only do you have Jack and David, Dave Sullivan, as well as David Sullivan, Karen Brady, Andrew Mollett, Dan Cunningham, you also do have Daniel Kretinsky on there. And here's where it becomes really, really interesting, because there's somebody else on here as well. And that person, and I hope I pronounce his name correctly, is Jiri Svaric. And his occupation is, and it actually says he's on Company House, is banker. Now, he joined the board on the 25th of August 2022. This is where it becomes really interesting. If you are interested, you haven't fallen asleep by now. It was suggested that because his nationality is Czech, that he was brought in by Daniel Kretinsky. However, he was brought in from the board of Chase Morgan Stanley. Do you see where this is going now? So you have to look at that and think, well, hold on a second. Tripp Smith, Chase Morgan Stanley, there's something going on here. There's a reshuffling of the West Ham board. I think this is largely to facilitate a takeover that is going to see Gold and Sullivan probably both on their way, and then a complete restructuring of the board and the finances of West Ham. Now, part of this was to facilitate this this transfer, whatever you want to call it, this purchase going through. But the Jim Ratcliffe thing was, he was a serious player in this. He was a serious contender to take over West Ham United. We've seen a spanner thrown in the works. Because Manchester United are now up for sale again, and now Jim Ratcliffe is interested in Manchester United. He's a Manchester United fan, that's probably worth saying. He was interested in buying them before. And I think once he knew he couldn't get them, then he started casting his eyes over at West Ham and thinking, I might have a little bit of that, thank you very much. This is bad news, as I understand it, for the people who are trying to, not force the sale through, but trying to attract buyers. Jim Ratcliffe looks like he's dropped out. Now that's, I don't know what kind of football owner he would have made. I really don't know. I do find it a little bit weird with the Manchester United one. I don't think he's going to be able to do it on his own. If Manchester United cost $5 billion, he's going to have to spend almost half of his fortune to buy that club, and then he's going to have to spend when he's there. You have to do that with backers, you have to do that with helpers. You don't get to be a multi-billionaire by thinking, I'm going to give half of that away. I'm going to suspend that. That being said, it may be a relatively safe investment. It does concern me with the takeover of a lot of these clubs, what might happen with European Super Leagues, but that's a subject for another day. But that is another reason why I want this video down as a marker now, because I do see a trend and something that's happening. I do see a number of clubs trying to make a move before the drawbridge gets pulled up even more than it already is. And I think West Ham are a part of that. I think West Ham are certainly manoeuvring that, which takes it back to poor old David Moyes. Even if you found what I said completely boring, if you still are here now, but even if you've just paid attention to what I've said, you must at least concede that in terms of West Ham United, that's a lot of financial manoeuvrings. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. And now you will probably understand that when I say David Moyes' future is just not down to Gold and Sullivan, that it's all very well that Gold and Sullivan saying, oh, you know what, David Moyes, he's got time to prove himself. Ultimately, it may not be them that gets to decide.